Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Central Texas Living with Ann Harder.
Hello, I'm Ann Harder. Welcome to Central Texas Living, the podcast. Today we take a dive into Waco history with our expert, Dr. Stephen Sloan. Dr. Sloan is an associate professor of history at Baylor University and the director of the Institute for Oral History. His keen understanding of local history led him to create the Waco History website and mobile app. And he hosts a podcast through Rogue Media called Waco History Podcast. It's a delight to have you here.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you so much for having me in.
Well, I had a chance to hear you talk to the Waco Town Committee of the National Society of Colonial Dames of America in the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful. And everybody was just so thrilled and so entertained. And you say history is entertaining, but Waco history can be quite entertaining.
I think Waco history is fascinating. That's one of the reasons why some of the projects you mentioned I've been involved in is I think our community has a wonderful and diverse history, and there's so much we can learn about all aspects of history just right under our feet. And so I enjoy the opportunity to talk about it. And I enjoy that occasion. Anytime it's a lunch talk, if I get lunch, I feel like I've been successful. And so they gave me lunch after the talk. So.
Yeah, Ridgewood wasn't bad.
It was great.
it was really nice. But it was so great to see your presentation because, I mean, you talked about people that folks were familiar with, and then some things that not very many people were familiar with. In Waco history, and of course, Waco has a very colorful past with the 6-Shooter Junction moniker that it had for so long, so many years ago. What do you think is one of the most surprising things you've learned about Waco's past?
Yeah, I think, 6-Shooter Junction, I think of all the names Waco's had, the Athens of Texas, which mm-hmm. there were several different of those, Geyser City, all the Jerusalem on the Brazos.
Well, it's still called that. Yeah. That's not an old name, I don't think.
All the things that Waco has been gathered. I think what I've been surprised by, and one of the reasons why I love history is I'll never have complete mastery of the subject within which I work. I think of folks that go to work, and by the time they've done it a couple of years, they know everything they need to know about that job, but I'll continue to learn. And even about this place, it's fun to dig deep in one place and see what you can discover. And so it's just a variety of things. And if we think about Waco's history and what is Waco's history, well, it depends on which perspective you want to look at it. And there's all sorts of different ways to look at it and things to learn as we kind of think about different lenses to examine the past.
What do you think is the best resource for someone wanting to learn more about Waco specifically?
So I'll brag again on the app. One of the things I like about that is when I came to Waco, I was a Baylor grad, but I came back in 2007 to run the Institute for Oral History that you mentioned. And I was really shocked that there wasn't an open Waco History Museum. There wasn't a place that kind of interpreted the breadth of Waco's history. We had soft drinks, we had mammoths, we had all sorts of sports, we had all sorts of different things. But we didn't have that sort of place. And so what I like about that platform is we've got 180 stories on there now, even more than that. And the variety of things that can be told that way, where if I tried to do a bricks and mortar solution to that, it would be real limited in the variety of stories that it could tell.
Mm-hmm. The Helen Marie Taylor Museum comes to mind. They have a few things, interesting things there, and it's by appointment. I think you can still see it. But what you're talking about are, the really in-depth stories mm-hmm. about some of the colorful folks of the past.
Mm-hmm. Helen Marie Taylor, that's a great museum. We actually had Miss Taylor on the podcast, which was a lot of fun. But that hasn't been regularly open to the public since the 1990s. And so just the idea of something that's accessible at our fingertips, and I think there are audiences that might engage in a digital platform that wouldn't necessarily walk through the door and see a museum.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about you a little bit. When did you know you wanted to study history? That history was there a certain teacher, or what got you into this area?
Well, I have an accounting degree from Baylor. And
well, God love you.
So the joke that I make when they ask why history is, I say I followed the money, which anyone familiar with education would know that's hilarious. But the hope was I'm from Texas and from a smaller town in East Texas, and the hope was I was going to take over a family business. It would have been a third generation family business. And I didn't work that out with my dad until after I graduated, that I didn't want to go back to Henderson, Texas, which is where I'm from. And so I had space while my wife was in grad school. She's a psychologist here in town, and just started taking history classes actually at the University of California at Los Angeles when I lived in California for a period of time, just because I was interested. Took another class because I was interested. And then start to say, well, maybe this could become something that I could do as a job. And so a quick 8 years later, I had a PhD, and somebody employed me to do this. And so it's been a joy. My career, which is almost 20 years long now, teaching and researching history, I've loved it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it must be rewarding to you when you have students that want to follow the same kind of career path, maybe because you inspired them.
It's a lot of fun. And I even think back, my wife likes to tell this story. I remember being on a date. I won't mention her name. But I remember being on a date at Schmaltz's in the late 1980s. So this dates it a little bit. And she said, "Stephen, if you could do anything, what would you want to do?" And I said, "I would love to talk to a lobsterman in Maine. I would love to talk to so-and-so in California and so-and-so." And kind of gave 5 or 6 different examples of folks I'd like to talk to and understand their experience. It's really what my job is now. I had no conception that anybody would ever pay anybody to do that at the time, but I see it as a bit prophetic that I've been able to have this job now that so many years ago I began to envision of what it might be, but every time I do an interview and capture someone's story, I'm really grateful just for the opportunity that I've been given.
Well, let's talk about oral history then, and that whole aspect of your work. I just think it's so important to get the thoughts and the memories of folks that are still alive before they pass.
Mm-hmm. And I also think, if I can get you to try to describe how you experience the world, I don't know how you experience the world. And so if I can get you to describe how you encounter events and phenomenon and historical events, and I can try to understand that. If you can describe it to me, then I can have a better understanding of what that event was and the meaning and significance of it. And I just think we're limited as individuals, and I feel like each time I hear someone's story, I get a more robust kind of understanding of some of these things that I'm interested in.
So how do you find those subjects to interview? For work, for your official oral history at Baylor University.
Yeah, so Baylor's into grants.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is driven by grant work that I'm able to get. And so I've done projects interviewing servicemen that liberated concentration camps in World War II. I've done interviews interviewing survivors of genocide, world genocide, that then immigrated to Texas. And so a lot of that has been dictated by partners that I can find that are willing to support our work. And then sometimes we have partners that aren't grant-based but are just community-based. Right now we're working with the Dr. Pepper Museum. They're wanting to develop new exhibit material on kind of the integration of lunch counters here in Waco. And so I've been doing interviews lately on African-American citizens we have here in town that knew what segregated lunch counters were like and experienced what it was like for those places, those public spaces, to begin to welcome both black and white.
Well, you mentioned the uncomfortable aspect of history, and just give us your thoughts on those who want to maybe erase those kinds of things from from the public discourse, statues coming down, all that kind of thing. Just what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think history is warts and all. I mean, we have ugly parts of our history. I feel like history is very complicated. That's one of the reasons why I like my job, because I think there's always a pull to oversimplify things in the past. And, one, we assume everybody in the past was racist and stupid. Or two, we assume everyone in the past was whatever the opposite of that would be. But it's always much more complicated than that. And so I think sitting down and studying and trying to understand how these people experienced the past is extremely important. And so I feel like we do a bit of this in our oral history work. We've been doing interviews since the 1970s, so we've got perspectives going back, to the early part of the 20th century where folks are describing in their own words. It's fun when I have students. I'll present two different stories where people will say different things about the same event, and I'll ask my students what's true. And that's where it gets interesting, where you've got to wrestle, with these aspects of not just what happened, but what did it mean? What did it mean, and what caused it, and what were the results of it? I think that's the interesting part of history.
Yeah, and how did people interpret it?
That's right.
That were living through it.
That's right.
At the time.
Mm-hmm.
For someone in their own family, could you give some pointers on somebody who maybe wants to do an oral history with maybe an elderly relative that, so that those thoughts aren't forgotten?
That's a great question. My favorite, I've done hundreds of oral histories. My favorite is my father.
Yeah.
I did interviews with him. He's passed about 11 years now, but I did interviews with him before he passed. And I do think it's extremely important. If you're listening and you think those stories are going to be around forever, they're not. And they're really hard to capture and nail down. And so I would say, going at it intentionally, to think about taking time to kind of sit and record these stories well. On our website, baylor.edu/oral history, we have an introduction to oral history manual that you can download and look at, and it'll give you some ideas of how to develop approaches to ask these questions and things like that. I think making sure it's preserved somewhere. We're interested in preserving stories. I know other people are interested in that as well. But I just think there's an old saying, an old proverb that says every time an older person dies, a library burns down. And it's true. In many ways, it's actually worse than that, because some libraries have the same things. Each individual is a repository of unique experiences. And those are things, we don't write memoirs anymore. Most folks won't have biographies written of them.
They don't even write letters anymore.
That's right.
So.
And so, and of course our digital footprint will disappear. Those of you that have a MySpace page, I'm sorry. That'll disappear and go into the ether. And so how do we make sure these things are documented and captured? I think for families, I encourage my students, whatever oral history they're working on, and they're working on very weighty research topics using oral history, that they start with their family as well, because it's important to gather.
They will treasure that in time. They really will. Back to Waco history.
All right.
What would you say was one of the most surprising things you learned about you were here as a student, so in a way it was sort of like coming home, but not really. But you were very familiar, I'm sure. And two, how much time do you spend at Oakwood Cemetery? Yeah,
Oakwood's amazing.
Yeah.
And there's so many stories that can be told through Oakwood. Oh, actually, I've got a funny story to you that just happened. Clint Lynch, who's the director of Oakwood Cemetery, was on our podcast last, and he contacted me this week and asked if he owed me a commission because they sold a cemetery plot off of the Waco History podcast. And I said, yes.
Well, good. Of course.
No, I said, I just have to be able to tell the story. But those, places like that are extremely rich. One thing that we want to do, interestingly, in placing things on the app is I didn't want all the pins in Oakwood or Greenwood. I didn't want to end every story with, and they died.
Right.
So, thinking about how to place-based, as a place-based app, how do we place people where they lived and where they were active and the spheres in which they operated in the community. And so there are so many great stories to tell out there, and there's so much that can be done on Oakwood itself. But what I've enjoyed, I think, is the stories that are less told. You were at the presentation where I rolled out some names. Do you know these names? And I think there was one person in the room, you knew one of the names, and there was one person in the room that may have known two out of the four. And so a lot of the same stories get told over and over, but there's always new stories to learn and new stories to appreciate.
Well, you mentioned Oakwood, and I think it's the second Saturday of October at 10 o'clock. They do some sort of stories.
Yeah, the Storytellers.
The Storytellers Guild. They go out there and they research different people who are out there, and it's wonderful. I have not missed one in several years. But there was one, I can't call the lady's name, but she was a well-known madam in Waco.
Molly Adams.
Molly Adams, okay.
Yeah, so she was one of probably the most famous madam in the reservation area of Waco. And so that's an area of Waco that's really interesting because it was a legal prostitution district. Then it was a very important Mexican-American neighborhood, Calle Dos, and then urban renewal came in. So you could look at it right now and say, well, there's a lot of empty land there. But, cities are like, it's like when you write something on paper and you erase it and you can still kind of see the traces
image,
of it there.
Yeah.
There's layers in cities, and a place like that has a lot of layers.
Yeah. Some amazing stories. Of course, I was a journalism student at Baylor, and you have to go to Oakwood and see the Braun statue. And that kind of brings me to another kind of famous aspect of Waco history, and that's the whole iconoclast and the fight he had with your employer, Baylor University. But Baylor's provided a lot of colorful stories over the years.
It has, yeah. And I think Waco's relationship with Baylor has always been really interesting. And you mentioned me being here in the 80s. As a student, I didn't have much notion of Waco. It may have been a place where I guess we had to go out to eat at some point, but there wasn't much of a relationship there. I think one of the great stories of the last 30 years or so here locally has been kind of Waco discovering Baylor and Baylor discovering Waco as far as at a student level and the way those relationships happen. I love that we're on Washington Avenue and Baylor's right down the street here. They have a building right down the street.
Right,
and so
social work school, yes. Right.
They have so much to offer each other, so it's good to see those interconnections being
town
created.
and gown. That's an expression I just learned.
Yeah. And
so it's kind of interesting.
It's a struggle for a lot of universities.
It can be.
Yeah, it really can be.
It can be. Waco owes a lot to Baylor, and I think the same way.
Definitely.
The same way back. You have been real involved, though. I mean, you came back and got this great job at Baylor, but you've been very involved in the community and with the Historic Waco Foundation as well, even served as president. Let's talk a little bit about those beautiful houses.
Yeah, wonderful houses, very iconic houses. I love East Terrace there on the river, but all the houses have different stories to tell, and I think are extremely important. And they connect, I think, to the 19th century in Waco, but they have a broader story to tell than that. I was talking to someone today about the Cottonland Castle, which was J.W. Mann's land out there that the Cottonland Castle is on. And so those houses have stories that are interwoven in a lot of aspects of early Waco.
Yeah, I think being involved and going and touring them when you can, it's just very important, and it helps keep that sense of ties to the history of Waco. When I was a teenager, I was one of the little belles who I got to learn. I think the first one I was at was Ford House, and had to learn all the stuff in one room and haltingly try to tell what I did not have the desire to become a history teacher myself as a result. But yeah, and so those are treasured memories for me.
Yeah, and there's volunteers there that put in hundreds of hours.
They do.
It's a volunteer-driven organization, and those men and women love those homes and sacrifice a lot for them, and so it's really great work.
Well, your podcast, you mention it, and this is something that you dreamed you'd be doing, something you always wanted to do, a podcast?
Well, we've told the story, but Randy Lane, who I'll continue to give a shout out to, approached me in 2018 and said, "Hey, how'd you like to do a history podcast?" So, again, we need content to meet expertise in podcasting. And so Randy definitely had the latter. He didn't have the former, but he was willing to learn. And so it created a partnership that launched us there, where he was willing to do the technical side. And there's so many stories to talk about. So Randy's moved on, of course, but his contributions to Waco live on through the podcast continuing.
Mm-hmm. And folks can find that here through Rogue Media, correct?
Yeah, so we're brother and sister now in the Rogue Media Network, and so it's been great to be part of a larger group instead of off on our own.
Okay, well, I like to end these little podcasts with a little questionnaire. It's similar to the one the late great James Lipton would use on Inside the Actors Studio, and this is my sort of abbreviated version of it. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word. So there can be meaning to word or just the favorite word to say. Whatever. I think I like to say ubiquitous. I think that's a fun word. I think that's a really fun word to say. It's ubiquitous.
Okay. Do you have a least favorite word?
Oh, a least favorite word. Let's see. Can I use two words?
Sure.
Conference call.
Yeah, we know all about those things now on a very, very real level.
That's right.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
That's great. And I think it's connected to what I was talking about before, just the opportunity to be granted the favor to have access to someone's story. There's an old saying also that says the greatest favor you can do for someone is let them tell you their story. And I feel like it's the reverse is true as well. It feels an honor to me to get the opportunity to hear stories. And so I'll leave, and I've been asked before, do you like interviewing famous people, the folks not so famous? And I would say generally it's the stories that I don't know, which are generally the stories that are less told. I just feel so honored that I get to hear some of these things, and some of these things I'm hearing that the family has never heard, and they're also extending me the courtesy of being able to share that experience and that story with others. And so that's what gets me excited. And so all the other things that I've got to do at Baylor, I do love teaching, and I do love the ability to write and research, but that's what really gets me excited.
Well, then what turns you off creatively or spiritually or emotionally?
I can't say conference call again.
You've used that one.
I've used that one. I would say two things that really bother me, and two things I think in the current environment that are pretty rampant, and we live in a very politicized age, although every age is somewhat politicized, but stereotypes and generalizations. When people stereotype or generalize about things and try to use too smooth a cover to explain one thing or another, it really bothers me. I think it denies the humanity that is in maybe viewpoints different than ours, and also deprives us of the opportunity to learn from each other. And so stereotypes and generalizations, I think, would be two things that would really turn me off.
It all kind of goes back to listening.
I think so. I think so.
Speaking of, what sound do you love the most?
That's a great question. So right now, and this isn't an ad, but I have a to-do app on my phone, and it makes this little ding when you do something. When you click it, it makes a ding. Uh-huh. And I will confess that I've written down things I've already done just so I can click it and hear that little ding sound. It's so satisfying. And it probably shouldn't be, but and I probably shouldn't need that affirmation from this faceless, humanless device, but when it makes that little ding, I'm a little more satisfied than I was before.
Sometimes we got to find it anywhere we can.
Exactly.
Just anything. Well, so what is your least favorite sound?
Least favorite sound. We were just talking beforehand. I don't have grandkids yet, but you were talking about your grandkids, and I guess a baby crying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was out somewhere recently, and I heard a baby cry, and you know, a certain sort of baby cry that is more of a distressed cry, and I realized how long it had been since I'd heard that, but just how it really cuts through you when you hear it. It wasn't my kid, and the kid wasn't near me. But wow, what a sound that really cuts to your heart immediately. So I'll say that sound.
Yeah, you still respond in some way. All right, so you have an accounting degree, but what other profession would you like to try?
That's a good question. Oh, well, this is probably telling you more than you want to know, but I mentioned being in California, and I had the opportunity to go to school some in California. So the other thing I did while I was out there, to my fiance's chagrin, is I did stand-up comedy for a period of time at the Ice House in Pasadena, California. And my wife panicked for a bit there before I set myself on a more professional path. But it was always something that I had wanted to do. It was really fun that I got to do it. But I kind of wish that window had been a little longer, that I got to play around with it a little bit longer before.
Hey. You could still there. We're sitting in a building where you could just right in the other room. You could do some stand-up.
I know. I got to build up my courage. Yeah.
I think you'd be great. I know your students would love to come here.
That's where I release it now. I get a little bit, and so I get that on some student evaluations.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Yeah.
Well, what profession do you know you would not want to do?
That's a good question. These are all really good questions. I was thinking of something the other day that I wouldn't want to do. Oh, risk management. I would not like to be in risk management, where you're just kind of aware. You're looking and researching things that could possibly go wrong.
All the negative.
And then maybe walking around and trying to. I just think it's got to affect how you view every environment. You couldn't enjoy anything if there was an uncovered plug in the room or something like that. So I think risk management is not what I would want to do.
I think I raised my kids this way. I didn't realize this, but having read news and it's all bad news, motorcycles, those little RVs, whatever. All these kind of horrible things are going to happen, whatever case it is. And I was always the first to tell them, no, this could happen.
Yeah, in your
so
career,
I was
Ann.
serving
Yeah.
as a risk manager, and I think my kid, she's no fun to be around.
Yeah, in your career, Ann, any bad thing that could happen to you, you probably read about it.
I read about it, so I've already top of mind there. Oh my goodness. All right, finally, what do you want to hear God say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well, I think, well done, my good and faithful servant. I'm plagiarizing there, but I would think that's what I would hope to hear, that my time wasn't wasted here. I made an impact. It's a better place for me having been here. We all think about it at times. I assume we all think about it. I haven't asked about this, but we all think about our George Bailey-ness. What was the difference made? Insert me out of the equation. How's the result different? And so I think that's what I'd like to hear when it comes down to that.
Well, your Waco History app has certainly made it a better place. It's fun to go check that out. So how can folks download that, and where can they find the website?
You can find wacohistory.org is the website, and the app is available in the App Store on Google Play. It's a big red bubble with Waco in the middle. I'll also say one opportunity we're going to have at the end of August. I'm not sure when this is coming out, and I don't want to date it, but we are going to have a Waco History scavenger hunt in town as a way to, now that we've got a lot of content on the app, we're going to start doing events with it and some programming with it, and we want to do some school curriculum with it. So,
that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so new things to come from it.
And you have a Facebook page, I guess?
We
Social
do.
Media platforms?
We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're on Instagram.
Very good. Dr. Stephen Sloan, thank you so much. It's
Thank
been
you,
a
Ann.
joy.
This was fun.
Central Texas Living is part of the Rogue Media Network family. Be sure to check out their other shows at roguemedianetwork.com. Please rate us 5 stars on iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Join us again soon for more Central Texas Living, the podcast.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into KNOW Waco. I am your host, Debbie, here to help you get in the know about Waco. So you may be asking yourself, why am I here? I'm here to be your tour guide through Waco. I'm here to tell you all the goings-on in and around Waco. I'm going to give you the 411 on what's happening, what's going on, and what events you should go to. This is your host, Debbie, signing off. Now that you know, go. Just go, Waco.
You are going on a run.
Are you building a new business while managing a family? Are you tired of trying to balance home and work and everything seems to be coming up short? Then there's a podcast made just for you. Baking Your Business from Scratch is where we create the perfect recipe for building a successful business while managing your home and family with love. Come join us and see for yourself.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.